Today in your 2017 Audi Q3, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install CURT's Class 3 2-inch trailer hitch receiver. The cross tube is going to be hidden completely behind the bumper, so you're only going to see the receiver here at the back. It's a Class 3 2-inch by 2-inch receiver, so it's going to be great for all of your towing needs, whether you're wanting to load it up with accessories like a bike rack or cargo carrier, or if you need to get some work done or maybe bring a small boat with you to the campsite for the weekend. It uses a 5/8" hitch pin and clip. Now, one doesn't come included with the hitch, but we've got plenty available here at etrailer.com. On bottom, we have hoop-style safety chain loops with a very large opening that should accommodate just about every shape, size, and style of safety chain. Our big guy here has no problem with it, and our smaller chains would be even easier. This hitch features a 525-pound tongue weight, and that's the force going down on top of the receiver. That's going to be more than enough for a 4-bike platform rack, fully loaded up with 4 bikes, and almost enough for the largest cargo carriers we have, fully loaded up to the max. You're going to be a little bit shy, about 50 pounds, because you got to figure in the weight of the carrier, plus the max capacity is about 550 pounds on those. So it's going to be a little bit over. It also features a 3,500-pound gross towing capacity, which is how much that it can pull behind it. And that's going to be more than enough if you want to bring some jet skis to the lake with you, or a small boat, or maybe you need to get just a little bit of work done and hook up a utility trailer and just move some things around. That being said, I recommend that you verify in your vehicle's owner's manual and ensure you don't exceed any of its towing capacities. Now I've got some measurements for you to help you when deciding on accessories. From the center of the hitch pin hole to the edge of the rear bumper, it measures about 7.5 inches. This is important when determining if any of your folding accessories can be placed in the upright storage position without contacting the bumper. And from the ground to the top inside edge of the receiver tube, it measures about 10.5 inches. This is important when determining if you need to drop, a rise, or a raise shank on any of your accessories, and since it is so low, I do recommend a raise shank on your accessories. Now that we've gone over some of the features of this hitch, why don't you follow along with me in the shop and we'll show you how to get it installed. We'll begin our installation underneath the vehicle by removing a couple of bolts that hold our fascia in place here at the bottom. They're towards the center, one on each side, and we're going to use a T27 torque socket to remove them. Next, we'll be lowering down our exhaust some, so we want to put a strap in place to ensure that we don't lower it down too far. So we're just going to hook this on each side and then just tighten it up some there so that way it can't drop down too far, and then we have control over it so we can choose how much we want to drop it down. There's 2 bolts that hold the exhaust hanger on the side of the frame here. We're going to use a 13mm socket to remove these 2. This is over on our driver's side. Now that we've got both of those loose, we're going to come back to our strap here and we can lower it down some more. If we need a little bit more clearance, there is another hanger a little bit further forward, and we're going to come to that one because we're going to go ahead and just take it off just to get the extra room that we need. So that's located towards the center, slightly on the passenger side. And this one's optional, but I really suggest it just to give you that extra clearance. We're going to put a little bit of silicone spray on it to make it slide off a little easier. And then we can just take our pry bar here and just stick it in there and just pry this hanger right off of there. And that's going to give us as much as we're going to be able to get out of this system here. Next, the instructions want you to remove this heat shield so we can trim out a section of it here, because we need to access this small little hole here and enlarge it, and you can see the heat shield covers it up. But rather than removing this heat shield, we really have plenty of room to access it, and we're only going to be cutting out a small notch. So you can just take your shears and put them up in there, and we're just going to trim down the edge like this. And when we trim across here, we are going to lose this mounting hole, but that's going to be okay. The exhaust hanger, when we go to bolt it back up, is going to clamp some of this heat shield on there. So that's going to help support it. So we're just going to finish cutting this little section out here. We now need to enlarge a couple of the holes in the bottom of our frame. This is our access hole that we're going to feed our bolts through. It's a little bit too small to feed the bolts through, so you will need to do some slight enlarging of this one for feeding the hardware in. And we need a bolt to drop down through this hole when we go to feed our hardware in. And this hole's too small for the hardware to pass through. So we're going to start by enlarging these holes. So this is the small hole just to the front of our ovular access hole here. We're going to enlarge this with a 1/2-inch drill bit. And then we'll do the same thing on the other side. Next, we're going to take the hole that's elongated here, and we need to enlarge it a little bit for our hardware to pass through. Now, there's a lot of ways you can do that. You can use a file like I'm going to be using here. You could use a grinding wheel. You could use a little cutoff to make a little notch in it. But we just need it so this bolt's going to pass up in there. And you can see it just isn't quite going to make it in there. So we're just going to file that out until we can get this to fit. Now that we've got it filed out enough to where we can pass our bolts up in there, we can start fish wiring them in place. So you're going to have some coiled wires that come in your kit. You can go ahead and undo those. And we can now take the coiled end, and we want to feed our bolts out through this bottom hole that we enlarged. And there's also a hole on the side of the frame. So we'll take our coiled end, we're going to push it through the hole. I like to start with the side one first. And when you push that through, we now need to push it down through the opening here, the large one that we filed to get our hardware to fit. You can kind of just stick your hand in there. Just be careful, since if you did file it or cut it, it could leave sharp edges on there. So we're just going to grab this coiled end now. So it can be a little tricky to get it to angle down. Now that we've got our coiled end fed through, we're going to slide our spacer on. You can go ahead and just push that in the frame. And then we're going to thread our carriage bolt on. Now the spacer that I slid on there is the one with the square hole. You're going to have some different spacers that have round holes. We're going to be using those in a later step. We can then take our bolt, feed it up into the frame. And then we'll grab our coiled wire here, and we're just going to pull our bolt until it comes out the side of the frame there. Once you get it pulled through, our bolt's going to stick out just like that. Now we can take our coiled wire for our other bolt hole, and it's going to be pretty much the same process. We're going to push that coiled wire up through there. We're going to drop it back down. Spacer first, then carriage bolt. And then we'll just pull this down through the hole. Now that we've got this one pulled down, the last one, we'll need to perform a reverse fish wire technique, which we'll start with our coiled wire here. We're going to slide our spacer on the coiled wire first this time. Then we're going to thread our carriage bolt onto our coiled wire. We'll now feed our carriage bolt up into the frame, and follow that up with our spacer, and then we can drop it back down through just like that. Once you've got all three bolts fed through on this side, we're going to perform the exact same procedures over on the other side. Over here on the other side, it's going to be exactly the same. The exhaust makes it a little tighter, but it's really no big deal. Now with the next set of hands, we're going to get our hitch into position. So you want to pull out on the fascia. That's why we took those bolts loose, so we can get it fed up over the exhaust on our driver's side here. Once we've got it fed over the exhaust, we can start feeding our coiled wires down through the openings. For your side hole, you'll want to push the bolt into the frame just a little bit, so that way our hitch can pass up through the side. Once you've got it pushed in the frame, you'll want to make sure you put that side fish wire through the hole in the side of your hitch. And if you can get your side bolts to pull through, go ahead, but it can be a bit difficult. So if you're unable to, just remove your fish wire from one of your bottom ones that you've got fed through and start a nut on it, because once you get one started on each side, the hitch will hold itself up, making it easier to get the rest of the hardware installed. And you can reinstall the rest of your nuts. Just take your coiled wires off and thread them in place. Just be careful not to push them back up into the frame. We can now go back and tighten down all of our hardware with a 19mm socket. Your side bolts are going to be a little tighter, so you may need to use a wrench or a ratchet. We can then go back and torque our hardware to the specifications found in our instructions. With the hardware loosely installed, we can then use our hitch as a template, and we're going to trim out around it on our fascia here. We can leave this section here that's straight up, but pretty much a lot of this we're going to have to trim out, so that way our fascia can go back into its normal position. And we're just using a pair of shears here to make our trim. And what I like to do with it is after I snip each side, you can actually take the center here and start bending it up, because that'll make it a little bit easier to continue to trim if you've got this center piece kind of bent up out of your way. And as you can see here, that where we're trimming it around it, we're just trying to make it so that way our bolt holes are going to line up again. So we only need to trim far enough forward for it to clear and for those holes to line back up. So we don't have too much more to trim there. We can put our exhaust back into position. A little bit of lubricant always helps with your hangers. They're just going to press right back on. Sometimes you need a little bit more lube. We can now lift our exhaust back up and re-secure it. One of the things we're going to use though is the other spacer that comes in our kit. So we're going to slide our bolt through our exhaust bracket, put the spacer on, then lift our exhaust bracket up and thread the bolt right into the factory hole. We're going to do the same thing with the one over here, right on the other side of our bracket. We can then go back and torque these bolts to the specifications found in our instructions. We can now push our fascia right back up to line up with the holes and reinstall those Torx bolts that we had removed. And then we can remove our strap. And that completes our installation of CURT's Class 3 2-inch trailer hitch receiver on our 2017 Audi Q3.